Hello and welcome back to Lingering Light, your sanctuary for thoughts that glow in the twilight of a well-lived life. Tonight, we are stepping into the woods with a man who believed that most people live lives of quiet desperation simply because they carry too much luggage. Henry David Thoreau was the ultimate American rebel, a philosopher who moved to a tiny cabin by Walden Pond in 1845 to see if he could live life down to its barest, most beautiful bones. He didn't go to the woods to hide from life. He went there to find it, stripped of the clutter, the gossip, and the endless pursuit of more. Thoreau taught us that wealth is not measured by the size of our barns or the number of our possessions, but by the amount of life we can actually afford to live. His masterpiece, Walden, is a love letter to simplicity, a reminder that when you throw away the junk, you finally have room for the soul. To help us navigate the thickets of Thoreau's wisdom, let's meet Harold Harry Miller. Harry is 76 years old and a retired senior vice president of a logistics firm in Chicago. For 40 years, Harry's life was about big. A big house in the suburbs, big leather chairs that required a GPS to find your way out of, and a big mahogany dining table that could seat 20 people, even though Harry and his late wife, Phyllis, hadn't hosted a party for 20 people since the bicentennial. Harry was a collector of the best lawnmower, the best crystal decanters, and a collection of antique clocks that ticked so loudly you couldn't hear yourself think. Harry didn't just own his house owned Harry. He was a prisoner of his own square footage, a man who spent his weekends dusting things he didn't use and insuring things he didn't need. But 3 months ago, Harry did something that made his children look for the nearest neurology clinic. He sold the mansion, auctioned off the mahogany, and moved into a 200-square-foot tiny house on wheels, parked right on the edge of a quiet lake in New Hampshire. Harry sat on a folding chair outside his new rolling cabin, watching the sunset over the water. It was quiet. So quiet, it actually made his ears ring. He picked up his copy of Walden and read a line that made him chuckle so hard he nearly spilled his diet root beer. I see young men, my townsmen, whose misfortune it is to have inherited farms, houses, barns, cattle, and farming tools, for these are more easily acquired than got rid of. Misfortune? Harry muttered. Henry, if you'd seen my mortgage in 1994, you would have called it a catastrophe. I spent 30 years working for a house that was basically a very expensive storage unit for furniture nobody sat on. Harry remembered the day of the estate sale. It felt like a funeral for his stuff. His daughter, Brenda, had cried when the mahogany table sold for $500. Dad, that's an heirloom, she had wailed. Brenda, Harry replied, that table is a 300-pound anchor. I'm tired of dragging it across the ocean of my life. I want to sail, not sit in the harbor polishing wood. Thoreau writes, a man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone. Harry looked at his new home. It had one bed, one chair, and a kitchen the size of a telephone booth. For the first time in decades, he didn't have a guest wing to vacuum. He didn't have a basement full of boxes labeled miscellaneous. He felt like he'd lost 300 pounds, and most of it was upholstery. In the first chapter of Walden, Thoreau spends a lot of time discussing economy. He details exactly how much it cost him to build his hut, $28.12, for those of you keeping score at home. He realized that most people spend the best years of their lives earning money to pay for a house they are too busy working to enjoy. Thoreau writes, the cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life which is required to be exchanged for it, immediately or in the long run. Harry looked at his bank statement. Without the property taxes on the mansion, the landscaping fees, the heating bill for 5 empty bedrooms, and the association dues for a pool he never swam in, Harry was suddenly loaded. I'm 80% less busy and 100% more wealthy, Harry noted. He thought about the life he'd traded for his status symbols. He'd traded the sunsets of his 50s for board meetings. He'd traded his Saturday mornings for a perfect lawn. I bought a ride-on mower that cost $5,000 so I could save 2 hours of work, Harry laughed, but I had to work 50 hours to pay for the mower. My math was all wrong, Henry. I was majoring in things and failing in being . Now, Harry's biggest expense was birdseed and a good pair of hiking boots. He ate simple meals, sandwiches, soup, the occasional grilled steak on a portable fire pit. He realized that a $10 steak tastes better under a canopy of stars than a $100 steak does under a crystal chandelier. Thoreau believed that the most important part of the day was the morning. "Morning is when I am awake and there is a dawn in me," he wrote. In the suburbs, Harry's morning was a ritual of stress. He'd wake up to a digital alarm, check the stock market, grumble at the news, and then spend an hour fighting the smart toaster that had more computing power than Apollo 11. Now? Harry woke up when the sun hit the lake. He didn't have an alarm, he had a blue jay that sat on his roof and yelled at him until he got up. Okay, you blue-feathered drill sergeant," Harry would yell back. He'd make coffee on a simple stove. He'd sit on his tiny porch and just watch. He watched the mist rise. He watched a turtle make the slow, agonizing trek from the grass to the water. To be awake is to be alive, Thoreau says. Harry realized he'd been sleepwalking through his 60s. He'd been so worried about his legacy, his name on a building or a fat inheritance for his kids, that he'd forgotten to actually be awake for his own life. "Legacy is for dead people," Harry told the blue jay. "I'm still here. And this coffee smells better than any stock dividend I ever earned." People often think Thoreau was a hermit who hated people. But he actually had 3 chairs in his house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society. He just didn't like chatter. Harry's neighbors in the suburbs were always talking about their home improvements. "Harry, you should see our new granite countertops." "Harry, we're installing a heated driveway." Harry realized that most of his social life was just a competitive sport. In his tiny house, he didn't have room for a dinner party, but he had room for a conversation. "I love to be alone," Thoreau writes. "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." Harry found that he liked himself more when he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wore flannel shirts that were older than his grandkids. He didn't shave every day. He realized that when you stop trying to look like a senior vice president, you start looking like a human being. When his son, Mike, came to visit, they couldn't sit in separate rooms staring at separate TVs. They had to sit on 2 folding chairs by the lake. They actually talked. They talked about Mike's fears, about Harry's memories of Phyllis, about the way the light hit the water. "Dad," Mike said, "you're different. You're not checking your watch every 5 minutes." "Mike," Harry said, "I don't have a watch. I have a lake. And the lake says it's now. It's always now. We've all heard that famous quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Thoreau believed this desperation came from trying to keep up with the Joneses, the Smiths, and the taxman. Harry realized his desperation had been very quiet indeed. It was the quiet sound of a heart monitor during a stress test. It was the quiet sound of sighing when he looked at his overcrowded closet. "I was a success by every standard," Harry mused, "except the one that matters. I wasn't happy, I was just occupied. Thoreau's remedy was simple: simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Harry took that to heart. He realized that every time he said no to a new gadget or a social obligation he didn't enjoy, he was saying yes to his own freedom. He was ejecting himself from the seat of desperation. He started a small garden, just 3 pots of tomatoes and some basil. No professional landscapers. No irrigation systems. Just Harry, a watering can, and the dirt. "Henry says that the earth is not a fragment of dead history, but a living poetry," Harry said as he poked at a worm. "And honestly? My tomatoes are poetic. A little lumpy, but poetic." Harry's favorite line in Walden is the most famous one: "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Harry looked at his reflection in the lake. He saw the wrinkles, the sunspots, the silver hair. He didn't see a senior citizen in decline. He saw a man who was finally fronting the facts. The fact is, we don't have forever. The fact is, you can't take the mahogany table with you. The fact is, the only thing you truly own is the breath in your lungs and the love in your heart. I spent 40 years living accidentally, Harry whispered. I lived the way the brochures told me to. I lived the way the magazines told me to. But now? I'm living on purpose. He wasn't afraid of getting older anymore. In the woods, old just meant sturdy. The ancient pines weren't past their prime, they were the kings of the forest. Harry realized that his rolling cabin was his version of Thoreau's hut. It was his laboratory of life. He was testing a hypothesis: can a man find more joy in 200 square feet than he did in 5,000? The answer, so far, was a resounding yes. As Harry settled into his third month by the lake, he encountered a concept in Walden that would have been heresy in his old corporate life: the value of idleness. In Chicago, Harry's time was a commodity. He spent time, he saved time, and he killed time. If he wasn't being productive, he felt a nagging sense of guilt, as if a ghostly boss were hovering over him with a stopwatch. But Thoreau writes, there were times when I could not afford to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment to any work, whether of the head or hands. I love a broad margin to my life. A broad margin, Harry mused, leaning back in his creaky Adirondack chair. I spent 40 years living right up to the edge of the page. No margins, just fine print and footnotes. He decided to practice broad margin living. One Wednesday afternoon, he sat on his porch for 4 hours. He didn't read. He didn't garden. He didn't check the weather on his phone. He just sat. He watched a spider weave a masterpiece between 2 railings. He watched the light change from a lemon yellow to a deep, bruised purple. Old Harry would have called this wasting a day. New Harry realized it was the most profitable day he'd had in years. The afternoon knows what the morning never suspected, Harry whispered, quoting another philosopher he'd picked up. By doing nothing, Harry was actually doing the most important work of all: he was being a witness to the universe. He felt his blood pressure drop and his soul meter rise. He was no longer a human doing, he was, finally, a human being. The final lesson Harry took from his time at the lake was about renewal. Many of Harry's friends back in the city talked about the end. They talked about the end of their careers, the end of their health, the end of the road. But Thoreau's Walden doesn't end with a sunset, it ends with a sunrise. The final chapter is about the coming of spring, the melting of the ice, the return of the birds, and the awakening of the earth. Thoreau writes, only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star. Harry realized that his senior years weren't the twilight of his life, but a different kind of dawn. The ice of his old, rigid habits was melting. The birds of his long-dormant creativity were returning. I'm 76, Harry told his reflection in the lake, which was now clear of morning mist. And I've got more day ahead of me than I ever had when I was 40. Back then, I was too busy to see the sun rise. Now, the sun and I are on a first-name basis. He realized that as long as he stayed awake, as long as he stayed curious, simple, and connected to the earth, he could never truly grow old. He was part of the everlasting morning. Harry picked up his binoculars to watch a pair of loons across the water. He didn't feel like a man who had retired. He felt like a man who had just begun his real career, the career of living. I do not say that John or Jonathan will realize all this, Thoreau concludes, but such is the character of that morrow which mere lapse of time can never make to dawn. Harry smiled. He might not be John or Jonathan, but he was Harry. And for Harry, the sun was just getting started. My dear friends at Lingering Light, Harry Miller found that when he lightened his load, his spirit finally had the wings to fly. Thoreau reminds us that our lives are frittered away by detail. We worry about the latest and the greatest, but the most essential things, the air, the water, the sunlight, and the silence, are free and eternal. Maybe you aren't ready to sell the house and move into a camper. That's okay. But maybe you can simplify one corner of your life. Maybe you can turn off the TV and listen to the birds. Maybe you can give away 3 things today that you haven't used in a year. I want to ask you tonight, what is one mahogany table in your life, something heavy and useless, that you are ready to let go of? What would your Walden look like if you could strip away the clutter? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Let's help each other lighten the load. And until our next gathering, live deliberately. Face the facts. And stay in the light. Good night, dear friends. Stay simple. Stay light.